Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. Please join me and my guests on this next interview. In addition to the suspension of military aid, the CIA director announced on Wednesday that the United States would also halt intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Zelenskyy has expressed regret over the heated exchange in the Oval Office and signaled his willingness to resume peace negotiations with Russia. President Trump acknowledged receiving a letter from Zelenskyy requesting a return to the negotiating table, potentially marking progress in U.S. Ukraine relations. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss these developments is Waschuk, a former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine. Sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Glad to be back.
So the most recent update has U.S. Stopped sharing military intelligence with Ukraine. When it comes to the logistics side of it, how much is that going to impact the current war effort on the Ukrainian front?
Well, I think the greatest concern is information regarding incoming Russian missiles, aircraft, etc. To what extent that information disappears. Ukraine is quite capable of local intelligence gathering. Its ability to track things happening thousands of kilometers away in Russia, where these airplanes and missiles come from, is less. But, there is a reciprocal problem here as well, because the U.S. was getting quite a bit of very useful intelligence information from the Ukrainians on the more granular details of Russia and its posture, and it's quite likely to lose that.
All right. Well, Trump has said that he received, he calls it an important letter from his Ukrainian counterpart. What's changed on Zelensky's stance? Has he got any other kind of cards and different options on the offer?
I think Zelenskyy is trying to synchronize himself with where European leaders are publicly at. Okay. In other words, Sir Keir Starmer, President Macron, and others, and certainly Polish leaders, are saying that they would prefer to do things together with the Americans, if possible. And I think President Zelenskyy has gotten with that program. If you read his letter carefully, it's drafted very skillfully. There is no direct apology there. He regrets that it came to this heated exchange, but doesn't say, "I'm so sorry." Because President Zelenskyy also has to factor in domestic opinion. And Ukrainian domestic opinion is very upset with the American presidential administration.
All right, and speaking of synchronizing and coordinating with the European Union, there's the meeting taking place today in Brussels. Do we expect anything new to come out of it? What are some of the more pivotal discussions being had?
Well, I think a lot will depend on how leaders choose to manage the Hungarian and Slovak factors. I think the key message came out last night, and that was in the speech from French President Macron, which I think will be a pivotal speech. It'll be studied years from now, where he talked about European security, where he did do this balancing act, where he said, we'd like to work with the Americans, but they may not end up on the same side as we are. And therefore, we need more autonomous capabilities. Therefore, France will look at potentially extending its own nuclear umbrella to other European countries, and that we will be putting European boots on the ground, planes in the air, in and around Ukraine after a peace settlement. So I think those are strong messages from France. The degree to which they can be reflected in a statement at 27 or in some slightly different geometry, well, we'll see in Brussels.
Right, and I think that pretty much echoes the rearmament plan of the European Union announced by Ursula von der Leyen. Do you think that's probably coming from the same line of thinking, giving Europe more, independence when it comes to defense?
Yes, and I think what's key is the also major shift in the German approach with the agreement by the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats to be able to spend much more on defense. It means that you can have a kind of restart of the Franco-German motor. And not everyone in Europe likes the Franco-German motor because of this notion of two countries dominating. But I think if they manage to synchronize with countries like Poland, the Weimar Triangle, to deliver significant results quickly, then that will be important. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that when people now think about European defense, they think about it also with and including the Ukrainian army and the armed forces, which are currently the biggest in Europe and the most battle experienced. So it's really a reframing of what European security and defense is about.
All right, actually, that's very interesting, integrating also Ukraine's armament and its experience into this whole European defense. Now, when it comes to the political will of carrying this project out, we are looking at about 800 billion euros of investment. And of course, some countries are already struggling a little bit internally with this economy and political issues. Do you think these world leaders will have the political will to carry out this very massive plan?
I think President Trump has helped them to get the political will to do this. If we look at some of the figures that are being talked about, for example, repurposing the European post-COVID reboot fund, it's, I think, about 120 billion euros, if I'm not mistaken. That's pretty much the sum that was spent on Ukraine in the course of 3 years. So when we look at the kind of money that was available for internal European purposes, it is certainly adequate and can be reallocated to meet the external challenges that are now confronting the Union and its members.
All right, and well, speaking of NATO, I'm also curious about the situation with Canada, because we've seen in recent days Donald Trump trying to get into a trade war with Canada. Do you think that would actually push them closer to as NATO allies? And do you see Canada contributing in any way, shape, or form with the defense of Europe?
Yes and yes. Prime Minister Trudeau's participation in Sunday's meeting in London was, I think, a very kind of vivid demonstration of Canada's connection. He stated afterwards that Canada would be prepared to take part in any peace support mission that would be organized. And we heard a similar message, for example, from Australian Prime Minister Albanese. So, if you will, Europe's traditional Anglosphere partners, apart from the U.S., are definitely on board, because they understand also that sticking together with the Europeans on this also improves their leverage with the United States. The American trade war with Canada is not going well for the United States. One of your previous guests in the previous segment was absolutely spot on when he said this is going to cause problems for the American economy. President Trump yesterday already announced a carve-out for the automotive sector, because it would have literally stopped functioning in about a week. If it hadn't, it may still stop functioning, because Canada is refusing to suspend its countermeasures until all American tariffs are withdrawn. So what's happened is that having launched this tariff war, the United States now needs to manage all the internal damage it's causing, whereas its targets or victims are saying, no way, we are in this to the end.
All right, and going back to the situation in Ukraine, the Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda recently came out saying that he sees the mineral deal as the most realistic and strongest security guarantee for Ukraine right now. Do you think that this is going to be the path that eventually Ukraine takes, using this mineral deal as some sort of security guarantee? Or do you think that Zelenskyy might still want to push for something that in his mind is more concrete, like the first time he had this discussion in the White House with Donald Trump?
There is a simple word that New Yorkers would understand to describe the role of the mineral deal, and that is bogus. There is absolutely no way that it provides any sort of security guarantee. It may provide an entree to the thinking of the president, but this is the same president who signed a rare earths mineral deal with President Ghani of Afghanistan in 2017, and then went on to do a deal behind President Ghani's back with the Taliban, and we know how that ended, even though it ended slightly past the Trump presidency, for the Afghan government and for the United States. So I think nobody should have any illusions that it'll work. It might be a form of diplomatic politesse, and the latest form of the agreement, at least as it was on last Friday, was more of a framework memorandum of understanding, relatively harmless either way. But there are rumors that the United States now wants to put numbers back in, put financial obligations on Ukraine back in. I would say that this would not be a proven and wise way of going about things.
Right. So in this case, what other alternatives would Ukraine have that the U.S. might accept? Or perhaps do we have to completely cut out that part of the equation and rely solely on the Europeans?
The willingness of the U.S. to cut Ukraine off from life-saving military intelligence suggests that its tactical pursuit of a reset with Moscow is far more important to it than the fate of Ukraine, or for that matter, European security. So I think the Americans are maneuvering themselves out of the picture.
So where do you think, where do you see things going from here in this case if America does decide to slowly kind of see itself out of this equation?
I think what's happening is very uncomfortable for any of us who have been lifelong transatlanticists. And certainly I know that, the Polish president, the Polish government belong to that category. But the Americans are not moving quietly and gently. They are moving quickly and recklessly in that direction. And so we are seeing changes happening by the hour. So clearly a greater degree of European self-reliance, a sort of a Europe plus configuration, which I described, countries that understand that they have an interest in sticking together. That probably also includes Japan, South Korea, and others who don't want to be sacrificed to an all-powerful big neighbor, need to find new ways of working together and securing their interests.
Right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
You're very welcome.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.